After college, I couldn't find a job for the longest time. Every resume I sent out vanished into a black hole. Just as I was about to give up, I got a call out of the blue. Leo, this is the property manager at Starlight Apartments. I saw your resume. Are you free to come in for an interview? The call was a surprise. I'd never applied to them, but I was desperate for a job, so I decided to take a chance. The place was way out on the outskirts of the city, a single old apartment building you had to take 2 buses to reach. The landscaping was nice, but it was eerily deserted. You barely saw anyone on the street. The interviewer's name was Mr. Evans. He was the property manager, a short, stocky guy in his 40s with a very serious expression. After I sat down, we went over my basic info. Just as I was trying to figure out how to sell myself, Mr. Evans changed the subject. He asked about my hometown and my birthday, down to the exact day, hour, and minute. I was a little taken aback. What kind of company was this? They didn't care about your degree or experience, just your astrological chart. After I gave him my exact time of birth, he excused himself for a moment. He came back half an hour later and said, "Congratulations. You got the job. Security guard. $2,000 a month, 3-month probation period at 60% pay. You'll be on the night shift. Room and board included." I needed the money, so after a moment's thought, I signed the contract. Mr. Evans offered to show me to my apartment. As we walked up the stairs, he gave me some instructions. The night shift is from 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next morning. You need to stay in the security booth the entire time. No leaving the premises. Also, the seniors in the building don't like noise, so after 11 p.m., you have to lock the main gate. No one in or out. I agreed to everything, but a weird feeling was settling in my gut. The apartment was on the 4th floor. It was actually pretty nice. Just a 1-bedroom, but it was clean and tidy. I got my stuff together and moved in right away. That night around midnight, not long after I'd laid down, I heard a little girl crying outside the building. The apartment complex was dead silent at that hour, so the sound was crystal clear. I got up and opened the door, ready to see what was going on. But the strangest thing happened. The moment I opened the door, the crying stopped. I figured it was just the wind, so I ignored it and went back to bed. But a little while later, that faint, sobbing cry seeped back in under the door, tormenting me for most of the night. The next day, at 7 p.m., I went down to the security booth early. A skinny, wizened old man was sitting on the steps, smoking a cigarette. His name was Lucas, my coworker on the day shift. After going over the shift change procedures, he got dressed to leave. But just before he walked away, he gave me a strange look and muttered, "Such a young kid." What a shame. I was confused. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but old Lucas was surprisingly quick on his feet. He was gone in a flash. Watching him go, I could only manage a wry smile. Maybe he was just looking down on me for being a young guy who'd settled for a security job. My first night was pretty quiet. Right after 11, I locked the main gate and leaned back in my chair to doze off. Then, in the dead of night, that little girl's crying started up again. For a whole week, I kept hearing that sound. It got to the point where I thought I was going crazy. Then, on my 8th day on the job, I actually saw her. It was the 13th. I was sitting in the booth, playing on my phone, when I heard a thump, thump, thump on the gate. I sat up and saw a little girl in a red dress standing outside. She looked about 6 or 7. The weather was bad that night, a light drizzle coming down. The girl's dress was soaked, and her little face was pale. "Mister, can you please open the gate? I need to find my daddy." I hesitated. After all, Mr. Evans had warned me not to let anyone in after 11. But seeing her standing there in the rain, I couldn't bring myself to say no. I pressed the button for the gate and asked her whose kid she was and why she was out so late. She didn't answer my question. She just robotically stepped through the gate, her eyes vacant, staring straight at a spot on the 2nd floor. She mumbled, "The person in 203. He has 2 days left." She was just a child, but her voice sounded ancient and weary. Her little face was wooden, almost stiff. I frowned. "What did you say, little miss?" She still didn't answer, her eyes glued to the window of 203. She stared for a good 10 seconds before walking deeper into the complex. Weird kid. I stared after her for a moment, then shook my head and sat back down to doze. The next morning at 8, old Lucas came to relieve me, gently shaking me awake. "You're a lucky one, able to sleep in a place like this." His comment was odd, but I was still half asleep and couldn't be bothered to think about it. I left the booth and headed upstairs to get some real sleep. But Mr. Evans popped out of nowhere and casually offered me a cigarette. "Leo, been here a week. How are you settling in?" I smiled and said it was fine, except that every night I kept hearing a girl crying, which was pretty annoying. "Oh, and last night a little girl came by looking for her dad. You don't think she was the one crying, do you?" The second I finished speaking, I saw Mr. Evans tense up like he'd been hit with a taser. You didn't let her in, did you?" I said, "Yeah, I did." "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just don't open the gate for anyone after 11. His tone was harsh. He hurried off, seeming to avoid the topic entirely. I thought it was just a small incident, but it turned out I had seriously underestimated the situation. On the morning of the 15th, I was playing online games with some buddies. I slept through the afternoon and didn't rush to my shift until 9:30 that night. "Why are you late?" As soon as I entered the booth, I heard old Lucas complaining. "Don't you fall asleep tonight. The coroner's van is coming." I froze. "What for?" Lucas glanced at me. "You haven't heard? The tenant in 203 is dead." I was shocked. "How'd he die?" "Heard he was making chicken soup in the kitchen. The soup boiled over, put out the flame, but the gas stayed on. By the time a neighbor smelled the gas and broke in, he was already gone." After Lucas left, I thought about it, and something felt wrong. I racked my brain for a while, and then it hit me. I remembered the little girl from 2 nights ago. On the 13th, she had said the man in 203 only had 2 days left. And today was the 15th. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? The thought left me dazed for a long time. I was only jolted back to reality when the coroner's van pulled up and started honking at the gate. I jumped up and scrambled to let them in. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My mind was a mess. Then, a few days later, I saw the daddy-seeking little girl again. It was late at night, and once again it was raining. I was in the booth on my phone. That's when she appeared, wearing that same red dress, standing all alone in the rain. "Mister, please open the gate." I was so frustrated. Whose kid was this, anyway? Why did she always show up in the middle of the night? I was reluctant. The last time had left me with a knot in my stomach. The kid was just too creepy. When she saw I wasn't moving, she didn't press me. She just stood there in the rain, waiting me out. The rain started coming down harder. I was afraid she'd freeze, so I finally gave in and buzzed the gate open. The moment it opened, she stepped inside. She had the same empty expression, said nothing, and just stared up at the sky. I said, "It's raining. You want to come in here and dry off?" She didn't answer. After a moment of silence, she raised her small hand and pointed to the 3rd floor. "The person in 301 has 4 days left." What? A cold sweat broke out all over me. "Don't scare me like that," I said, my voice unsteady. "What do you mean 4 days?" She just shook her head numbly and started walking deeper into the complex. "Wait." I rushed out of the booth, determined to get a straight answer. But she suddenly turned her head and gave me a smile. It was a cold smile, one completely devoid of warmth. I froze on the spot. That kid's smile was more terrifying than no smile at all. By the time I snapped out of it, she was gone. My intuition screamed that something was very wrong. The next day, I started paying attention to the man in 301. His name was Frank. He was an electrician. Every morning at 9, he'd leave with his toolbox, and he'd come back around 6 in the evening. And every time he came home, he'd be carrying a bottle of liquor. It was like clockwork. I watched him for 3 whole days and didn't see anything unusual. The guy's routine was incredibly regular. He was strong, healthy, and aside from his drinking, he had no bad habits. He didn't look like a man about to die. By the afternoon of the 26th, I had been watching him for 4 days. When I saw him come home from work, bottle of booze in hand, I finally felt how ridiculous I was being. Wasting all this time on some baseless prediction. I was so bored. "Whatever. I'll just grab some smokes and head to my shift," I muttered, shaking my head. I had just walked a little way from the building when I heard a loud bang from the stairwell, followed by someone shouting, "Something's happened to Frank. Somebody call 911. What was happening? A sense of dread washed over me. It couldn't be, could it? I spun around and sprinted up the stairs. When I reached the second floor landing, my face went white. Frank was lying in a heap at the turn of the stairs, his neck drenched in blood. His limbs were twitching. It was clear he wasn't going to make it. His face and neck were embedded with shards of glass. I was losing my mind. I grabbed the guy who was watching and asked him what happened. Man, talk about bad luck. He was walking up the stairs, slipped, and tumbled all the way from the third floor to the second. Normally, a fall like that wouldn't have been a big deal for a guy his size. The problem was that when Frank fell, he was carrying that bottle of liquor. The bottle shattered on impact, and the broken glass sliced right into his neck. In the end, Frank didn't make it. I heard later that he lost too much blood and died on the way to the hospital. When I heard the news, my mind went completely blank, like I'd been struck by lightning. Terrified, I ran back to my apartment, slammed the door, and leaned against it, panting, until my heart rate returned to normal. I was genuinely scared out of my wits. That little girl was way too damn creepy. The next few days were a blur of fear and anxiety. I was terrified the little girl would show up again and tell me my time was up. Thankfully, the apartment was quiet for a long while, and the girl didn't reappear. Gradually, I started to think it was all over. Until the third rainy night. I remember it clearly. It was October 15th, payday. I spent the afternoon at the supermarket, buying a bunch of groceries and supplies. I had too much to carry, so I hailed a cab. I got to chatting with the driver. When he found out I worked at the Starlight Apartments, he was surprised. "Wow, kid, you've got guts." I was confused. "What do you mean?" The driver said, "Everyone in this city knows that place is bad news. A lot of people go out of their way to avoid it." A knot formed in my stomach. I pressed him, "How is it bad news?" The driver couldn't say for sure. He just scratched his head and gave a sheepish grin. "It's just what I've heard. That place, it's supposed to be no good." His words left me feeling uneasy for a long time. And of course, it was raining that night. Listening to the pitter-patter of the rain outside my window, my anxiety grew. Sure enough, just after midnight, the little girl in the red dress appeared again. You can't imagine how scared I was. The sight of her made my stomach clench with fear. But this time was different. She didn't ask to be let in. She just stood in the rain on the other side of the glass, staring at me with those cold eyes. That dead, emotionless gaze sent a shiver down my spine. I don't know where I found the courage, but I managed to shout at her, "What are you doing here again? Go on, say it. Who's the unlucky one this time? I'm here for you." With just 4 words, she shattered the tiny bit of courage I had managed to build. "You have 7 days." What? It felt like I'd been struck by lightning. I stumbled and nearly fell to the floor. After the little girl left, I pressed my back against the wall, my head buzzing, too terrified to think. I don't remember how I survived that night. The sun was just coming up when I bolted from the booth, not even waiting for Lucas to arrive. I ran straight to Mr. Evans's office, shouting that I quit. Mr. Evans was baffled. "What's wrong with you?" he asked. I stammered out the whole story. But after listening to me, Mr. Evans just laughed. "Leo, you're a grown man. You can't seriously believe that stuff. That little girl's not right in the head. You actually believe her? That's hilarious." "Huh?" I froze. "What do you mean? You know her?" "Of course I do." Mr. Evans calmly got up and pushed me down into a chair. "Her name is Jade. She lives in H Village, right next door. It's less than 2 miles from here. If you don't believe me, I can take you to see her sometime." I pressed him. "What the hell is going on?" Mr. Evans sighed. He explained that the girl came from a single-parent home, and her mother had a history of hereditary mental illness. The girl would have these episodes every now and then, and whenever she did, she'd come to the apartment and say all sorts of crazy things. "It's not just you. She's cursed just about everyone who lives here. It's nothing new." I was stunned. Seeing I was still shaken, Mr. Evans poured me a cup of hot water and said with a smile, "Come on, kid, don't be so superstitious. I don't even know what to say to you. Look, I've got work to do, so I can't chat. Just focus on your job. Once your probation is over, I'll talk to corporate about getting you a raise." Mr. Evans, I still had questions, but Mr. Evans was already getting impatient. He shooed me out of his office like I was a fly, telling me not to bother him with such nonsense. Defeated, I started walking back. But on the way, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Forget whether the girl lived in H Village or if she was mentally ill. The fact remained that her two predictions had been spot on. The two tenants who died may have died in different ways, but they both died after the little girl appeared and made her prophecy. Their dates of death matched her predictions exactly. That was no coincidence. And Mr. Evans's reaction fell off, too. I remembered the first time I mentioned the girl to him. He was so agitated, he looked like he wanted to kill me. Why the complete change of tune today? The more I thought about it, the more I was convinced Mr. Evans was hiding something. Back in my room, I didn't go to sleep. Instead, I stood at the window, watching his office. Throughout the day, Mr. Evans stayed in his office. On the surface, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But if you looked closely, you could see something wasn't right. He kept glancing down and fumbling with his desk drawer, as if he were looking for something. After a moment, he'd slam the drawer shut and pace around the office, looking deeply troubled. This unusual detail caught my attention. That night at 9 p.m., I didn't go to the security booth. Instead, under the cover of darkness, I snuck back to Mr. Evans's office. The window was unlocked. I easily climbed inside and tiptoed over to his desk. When I got closer, I saw that the drawer was locked. What's so important that it needs to be locked? I decided to go for it. I grabbed a fruit knife from the desk and started prying at the lock. After about 10 minutes of work, I finally got it open. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and pulled the drawer out. Inside was a stack of files. I took them out, laid them on the desk, and started going through them one by one. Soon, a few old newspapers tucked in the middle caught my eye. As I patiently read the articles, a wave of terror seized me. The front pages of the 3 old newspapers each reported a bizarre, sudden death, and every single one of them had occurred in this apartment building. They all had one thing in common. Like me, they had all been night security guards here. Reading the articles, my skin broke out in goosebumps. A chill shot through me, freezing me from head to toe. The first victim had died of sudden heart attack in the security booth. The second died right outside the main gate. He was crossing the street after a shift to buy cigarettes when a bus lost control and slammed into him, turning him into a mangled mess. But it was the third victim's death that truly horrified me. The guy had lost a fortune betting on a game. In despair, he chose to hang himself in the security booth in the middle of the night. That's right. The very place where I sat on duty every night, someone had ended their life with a leather belt. At this point, I was petrified. A million thoughts raced through my mind. I thought about my first interview, about Mr. Evans's strange questions, about the crying I heard every night, and about the little girl who could predict people's deaths. This place was definitely cursed. The thoughts in my head were suffocating me. I dropped the newspapers and ran. I didn't even care about the luggage I'd left in my apartment. All I wanted was to get away from this hellhole as fast as possible. But before I could make it to the main gate, a gruff voice called out from behind me. "Leo, stop right there." I froze and turned around. It was old Lucas. He ran up, grabbed my arm, and without a word, started dragging me back toward the security booth. "You little punk, where do you think you're going? You didn't even come to relieve me. Get back in there." "No, I'm not going. That place is haunted," I screamed, struggling desperately. "Stop yelling. Just get inside with me." Lucas snapped, his dead fish eyes glaring at me. I refused, ready to keep fighting, but his next words sent a shiver up my spine. "If you run now, you'll die even faster." "What?" I went numb, my face pale as I looked back at Lucas. From his twisted expression, I could tell he knew something. As if in a trance, I let him lead me back into the security booth. I had barely sat down when I heard Lucas sigh. "Looks like you know about it now." "Know about what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "About the 3 dead guards, and the fact that this building is haunted." Lucas stared at me with sharp eyes. "You didn't show up for your shift. I knew you must have figured something out and were planning to run for it, right?" "You guessed it," I said, my face a mask of despair. "So what?" "Lucas, I have to go. I can't stay here anymore." Lucas's voice was ice cold. "You really think you could just walk away?" "What do you mean?" I sank back into the chair in terror. Lucas's face was grim. "Let me tell you something," he said in a sinister tone. "The 3 guards before you, they were just like you. They found out the place was haunted and tried to leave. And look what happened to them. What are you saying? I was horrified. Lucas's face was as hard as stone. So you can't leave. The moment you miss a shift, the consequences will find you. I was silent, my head buzzing. My trembling jaw was the only sign of the terror I felt. Lucas, acting as if he knew everything, said calmly, "You brought this on yourself. You didn't follow the rules, did you? Tell me the truth. Did you let someone in?" I nodded numbly. "Yes, a little girl. I let her in twice." Sigh. I knew it. Lucas took a long drag from his cigarette. "The 3 guards before you," he mumbled, "they all made the same mistake." "Lucas," I still didn't understand. "Why couldn't I let her in?" "Oomph. What do you think?" Lucas's gaze was cold, like a cobra's. Then he told me a story. About 7 years ago, a horrific crime took place in this building. A blind woman was brought here, held captive, and brutally abused for a long time. The woman was disabled. She couldn't see, so she couldn't escape. She was trapped here for over half a year. One day, when her captor was out, the blind woman tried to escape through a window. She lost her footing and fell from the 4th floor, leading to an even greater tragedy. Which floor? Hearing that, my eyes widened. Another, more terrifying thought began to form in my mind. Lucas seemed to know what I was thinking. He gave me a cool glance. "You guessed it. The apartment you're living in, that's where the blind woman fell from." My head swam again. My body went limp, and I slid out of the chair like a noodle. No wonder I thought I heard a woman crying the first night I stayed in that room. I was living in a goddamn haunted apartment. Wait, but then I realized something else. I jumped up. What does this have to do with the little girl? The one who was held captive was a grown woman. Don't be in such a hurry. I'm not finished yet. Lucas looked away. He said that later, when the police took the blind woman's body, the medical examiner discovered she had been pregnant when she fell. As the woman was dying, all of her rage and resentment transferred to the ghost of her unborn child. And that's how the little girl came to be. As for why the little girl kept coming back, it didn't take a genius to figure out. She was looking for her father, so she could take him down to hell with her for a family reunion. A shiver went down my spine. No wonder the first time she appeared, she said she was looking for her dad. "So what about the 2 tenants?" I asked. "How did they get targeted?" "They both witnessed the blind woman's suffering, but did nothing. So in the ghost child's eyes, they were accomplices in her mother's death." Sigh. Now the ghost child has taken 2 of the accomplices. Her last wish is to find her biological father and drag him to hell. Lucas let out a long, weary sigh, but his gaze grew sharper and sharper until it finally landed on me. "And you're the father she's looking for." "Why?" I was about to have a panic attack. What does that have to do with me? I was still in middle school when all that happened. "Why are you yelling at me? If you're so smart, go explain that to the ghost." Lucas looked at me with a sinister expression, his words dripping with menace. "Who told you to move into that haunted apartment? After a while, you absorbed all of its dark energy. Of course, she's going to think you're her father." My jaw trembled. I finally understood the whole story, but now I was even more terrified. "Remember, don't wander around at night. She might be out there, waiting for you." As he finished, Lucas looked down at his phone and muttered that it was about time. I grabbed his arm. "Lucas, don't go. I'm scared to be on watch alone." Lucas looked torn between laughing and crying. "Like I'm not scared. I was just being nice and telling you all this. Don't you try to drag me down with you." With that, he pushed me away and scurried off, leaving me to collapse, helpless in my chair. I was filled with regret. So much regret. If I had known, I wouldn't have taken this job for any amount of money. That night was an agonizing ordeal of helplessness and terror. Every second felt like an eternity. Fortunately, she didn't appear. I was on edge all night. It wasn't until the sky began to lighten that I was finally able to breathe. Once the sun was up, the little girl probably wouldn't come out. I let out a sigh of relief, not even bothering to wait for Lucas. I staggered back to my apartment, my forehead covered in a cold sweat. I hadn't gone far when I saw someone standing in the hallway. He demanded, "Leo, did you go through my desk drawer last night? You've got some nerve." The sight of Mr. Evans made all my fear turned into a white-hot rage. I lunged at him, ready to strangle him. "You old bastard. You've really screwed me over." "Don't do this." Mr. Evans dodged my hands and backed away. "Calm down. It's not that bad. I had no choice but to lie to you." "Bullshit. What do you mean you had no choice?" I was furious and threw myself at him, and we started a fight. A few seconds later, Mr. Evans had me pinned to the ground. "Calm down," he said. "Right now, I'm the only one you can trust. I'll tell you what to do." I couldn't move. As much as I hated the bastard, there was nothing I could do. I just snarled, "What else do you have to say? Come with me first." Mr. Evans let go and motioned for me to follow him. I flexed my hands and feet and reluctantly followed him. When we got to his office, he immediately shut the door and poured me a cup of hot water. I didn't take it. "You can skip the fake kindness," I said coldly. "What do you want to say?" "Sigh." Mr. Evans put down the water glass and rubbed his temples. He sat back down in his chair. "About the little girl? What have you figured out?" "I know pretty much everything," I said coldly. "She's a ghost child, right?" Mr. Evans seemed to pause for a second. He didn't answer directly, just shook his head. "Who told you that?" "Lucas, of course," I said dismissively. "He's worked here for years. He knows all about it." "Huh." He gave a non-committal smile, his face full of disdain. "You can listen to what he says, but don't believe all of it." "If I don't believe him, I'm supposed to believe you?" I almost lost my temper again and lunged at him. Seeing this, Mr. Evans quickly surrendered. Okay, just sit down. We can talk about this." I sat down, my face grim. "The stuff from 7 years ago, is it true?" Mr. Evans nodded. "It's true." "What about the guy who did it?" I asked. "He's dead. Died in prison." Mr. Evans looked away, his eyes dark. "Dead?" I couldn't understand. If the killer was already dead, why was the ghost child still killing people? Mr. Evans gave a bitter smile. "Ghosts act out of obsession and habit. The girl is a ghost, and a very stubborn one. Plus, she's a child. She can't tell right from wrong. All she knows is that the man living in 402 is her father. She has no idea that her real father has already paid for his crimes." "How can that be?" I asked, shocked. Mr. Evans sighed. "It's not that hard to understand. The ghost child was only born after the blind woman died. She has no idea what her biological father looks like. She just inherited her mother's resentment and keeps lashing out." I felt a wave of despair. In other words, unless everyone in the apartment was dead, the little girl wouldn't stop. "That's right." Mr. Evans looked up again, his eyes meeting mine. "Actually, the number of people she's killed is far more than you know. This whole thing was a huge scandal. It even made the news." I closed my eyes, remembering what the cab driver had said. I felt even more numb. Eventually, I ran out of options. I had to ask someone to find me a spiritualist. According to the spiritualist, the ghost child's malevolent energy was too strong for ordinary methods. So, he came up with an idea: install a security gate outside the building. I was dumbfounded. "You think a gate can stop a ghost?" Mr. Evans gave another bitter smile. "Of course, it's not that simple. We needed another solution. The solution was to find someone with a very specific, powerful birth chart, full of yang energy. It had to be a young man, full of vitality, under 30, preferably unmarried. A person born at such a time has a very strong life force. It can suppress the dark energy of the haunted apartment to a certain extent. Because the ghost child's energy came from her mother, and the mother had died in that apartment, if they could suppress the apartment's energy, the ghost child's would also be weakened. Of course, it wasn't that simple in practice. Before me, 3 other guards had lost their lives. Clearly, the method wasn't foolproof. So that's what this is all about." I gave a hollow, bitter laugh. No wonder Mr. Evans's first priority in my interview wasn't my degree or my work experience. The moment he got my birth date, he was as happy as an idiot. "If this method isn't completely reliable," I said numbly, "why are you still doing it?" Mr. Evans's expression was even more bitter than mine. He said he had no choice. Even if the method wasn't 100% effective, at least it had some effect in warding off evil. Actually, the people in 203 and 301 didn't have to die. If you hadn't opened the gate for her. My jaw tightened. My face was ashen. You're the one who didn't explain things clearly, and now you're blaming me. Anyway, you have to keep watch over that gate. After midnight, stay in the security booth. Don't let anyone in, and don't let anyone out. Mr. Evans said this was the only way to avoid disaster. I know. I had no choice. I could only nod grimly. Before I left, I asked Mr. Evans if he could move me to a different apartment. His face hardened. No, he said. We need your young energy to suppress the haunted apartment. If you're scared, you can invite some friends to stay with you. The more young people, the better. I wanted to spit in his face. That comment alone proved he was not a good person. Back in my apartment, I stared at my surroundings, completely dazed. Before, when I didn't know the full story, the room felt fine. But now, it felt like every wall was covered with the little girl's hate-filled eyes. I couldn't sleep. I was exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. I dragged myself through the day until 9 p.m., then numbly walked downstairs. As I passed the property office, I saw Lucas and Mr. Evans arguing about something. They were both agitated, their faces red with anger. But the moment they saw me, they both forced a smile. I was suspicious, but my brain was already sluggish. I didn't have the energy to care. About half an hour later, Mr. Evans came to find me alone. He took out a small pair of scissors and told me to give him my hand. I had no idea what he was doing. What for? I asked. Don't be nervous, Mr. Evans said. Ultimately, I'm the one who dragged you into this. I'm going to have someone make a protective charm for you as compensation, but I need a little bit of your blood. Oh, I was confused. The whole thing felt weird. Before I could decide whether to agree, Mr. Evans just went for it, making a small cut on the back of my hand. Ow! I yelped in pain, snatching my hand back. Are you crazy? I didn't say yes. Mr. Evans looked offended. I'm trying to help you. Why are you so ungrateful? With that, he walked off with my blood, tossing me a roll of gauze to wrap my hand myself. That bastard was definitely crazy. It was another long, difficult night. I had to chain smoke just to stay awake. Finally, at 8 a.m., Lucas came to take over. He saw the bandage on my hand and looked surprised. What happened to you? I tiredly explained what had happened. Lucas's eyes widened. You gave it to him. What else was I supposed to do? I sighed. Whatever. He might be a little reckless, but at least he's trying to help. It was just a little pain. Lucas smiled, a smug look on his face. He glanced at my hand, then shook his head and sat down. His expression made it clear he was hiding something. But when I pressed him, the old man just chuckled and said, it's nothing. The whole thing bothered me. I thought back to the night before when I saw him and Mr. Evans arguing in the office. I had a strong feeling that the two of them were hiding a lot more from me. My mind was in even more of a jumble. I went back to my apartment after my shift, but I couldn't sleep. I even started hallucinating. I'd occasionally see the little girl in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Sometimes, even when I did manage to fall asleep, I'd feel someone breathing cold air on my ear. And in that cold air, I'd hear the little girl's voice counting down. For days left. It was like she was everywhere in the apartment. 3 days left. You have 2 days left. The ridiculous thing was, I couldn't tell if it was real or a hallucination. All I knew was that if this kept up, I was going to have a mental breakdown and end up dead like the 3 guards before me. On the 18th, I took advantage of good weather and went to a pharmacy to buy sleeping pills. One pharmacy would only give me 2 pills, so I went to several until I had about a dozen. When I got back, I immediately took 2, forced myself to empty my mind, and lay down on the bed, waiting for the pills to kick in. But half an hour later, I was still wide awake. Even the sleeping pills weren't working. Damn it, I was furious. I jumped out of bed and kicked the nightstand as hard as I could. I was just trying to vent. But when a nightstand fell over, a yellowed, old photograph fell out. There were 2 people in the photo, a man and a woman. The man was Mr. Evans. I didn't recognize the woman, but she was very pretty. In the picture, Mr. Evans had his arm around the beautiful woman, proudly flashing a peace sign. The woman's expression, however, was miserable. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she looked terrified and hurt. Looking at the photo, I was shocked, because the woman's eyes were completely empty, unfocused. Even though she was looking at the camera, Her expression was numb. And the background, it was taken in the living room of this very apartment. Wait a minute. In a flash, a horrifying thought entered my mind. Lucas had said that the woman who was tortured and held captive was blind. The woman in the photo had empty, unfocused eyes, which fit the description perfectly. Why was she in a picture with Mr. Evans? Could it be that Mr. Evans was involved in what happened back then? You son of a bitch, Evans. You rotten bastard. I practically ground my back teeth to dust. I clenched the photo in my fist, grabbed a fruit knife, and was about to go downstairs to confront him. But just as I was about to reach his office, I saw Mr. Evans leaving. He was carrying a black plastic bag and sneaking off toward the woods behind the complex. Evans! I was seething, about to shout his name and charge at him. But I managed to hold my tongue. In my current mental state, I wasn't sure I could win a fight against him. His furtive behavior made me curious. I cautiously followed him. When I found a place to hide, I saw that he was burning paper offerings. The black plastic bag was full of paper money. There was also a small paper doll. The doll's back was covered in crooked red lines. Unfortunately, I was too far away to see what was drawn on it. As Mr. Evans burned the paper, he muttered, "Go find him. You just need to go find him." I hid in the shadows, holding my breath. It wasn't until Mr. Evans had finished burning the offerings and left that I cautiously approached and pulled the partially burned paper doll from the fire. Even though the doll was mostly burned, I could still make out the 8 characters of a birth date written in red ink on its back. It was my birth date. That old bastard. The moment I saw the doll, I understood everything. Combined with what he had just said, it wasn't hard to guess. The old bastard was planning to burn my birth date as an offering to the ghost child to make me his scapegoat. It had to be. I finally understood why he had come to get my blood the other night. And I finally understood the ambiguous, cold smile on Lucas's face when he heard about it. As my thoughts raced, I started to understand even more. Mr. Evans had hired 4 people for the night shift, not to use our yang energy to guard the gate, but because that gate couldn't be guarded at all. He was clearly planning to use our lives as scapegoats to escape the ghost child's wrath. My predecessors must have been killed by him in the same way. At that thought, I was filled with an uncontrollable rage. I wanted to turn around and fight him to the death right then and there. But in the end, I didn't. Instead, a bold plan began to form in my mind. If Mr. Evans could push me to be the scapegoat, why couldn't I turn the tables and use the little girl to get my revenge on him? It would kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Not only would Mr. Evans get what he deserved, but it would also help me escape my own impending doom. With that in mind, I forced myself to control my emotions. I put away the crumpled old photo and went to my shift as if nothing had happened. That night, a light rain began to fall again. It was the prelude to the little girl's appearance. I must have been crazy. Staring out at the rain, I actually felt a sense of excitement. I was even looking forward to her arrival. Just after midnight, I heard the pitter-patter of footsteps in the rain. When I looked up, the girl was already standing outside the gate. She still had those same numb, empty eyes. My heart was pounding like a drum, partly from fear and partly from the thrill of my revenge plan. After about 10 seconds of silence, I said, "I know you're here to kill me. But before you do, I have something to say." She didn't speak, just lowered her head, waiting. I said, "If I tell you who your real father is, will you let me go?" "Who is he?" Just as I'd hoped, the little girl's voice immediately shot up, sharp and piercing. Negotiating with a ghost was a high-pressure situation. I gritted my teeth and forced the words out. "I can tell you where he is, and I can open the gate for you. But there's one condition. You have to let me go." She giggled. "How can I trust you?" I gritted my teeth and took the plunge. I pulled out the photo, slid the window open a crack, and quickly tossed it out, telling her it was proof. The little girl picked up the photo and looked at it. Her back was trembling slightly. She numbly raised her gaze, her voice as hoarse as a screech owl. "Where is he?" I immediately gave her Mr. Evans's apartment number. Then, with trembling hands, I pressed the button to open the gate. The gate slowly swung open with a sickening creak. In that moment, I was terrified. My palms were slick with sweat. I was afraid she'd go back on her word and kill me first. Fortunately, my gamble paid off. The little girl stepped into the complex without even a second glance at me and walked straight toward Mr. Evans's apartment. Watching her long, distorted shadow under the streetlights, I was trembling, but I also felt a sense of confusion. Don't ghosts not have shadows? Why did she have one? The thought flashed through my mind, but at the time, I didn't dwell on it. All I knew was that my plan had succeeded. After the little girl was out of sight, I felt like all the strength had been drained from my body. I collapsed back into my chair, closed my eyes, and smiled in relief. That night, the apartment building was incredibly quiet. The light, rain fell steadily, but the sound of the girls crying that had haunted the complex was completely gone. Things had gone exactly as I planned. Not long after sunrise, I heard the news of Mr. Evans's death. I heard the bastard had suffocated. The night before, he had closed all his windows before going to sleep, then pulled the covers over his head and smothered himself in his own bed. The news caused an uproar in the building. Almost every tenant was talking about it, shocked at how bizarre his death was. But I didn't say a word. How could a grown man suffocate himself in his own bed? It was obvious someone had held his mouth and nose shut. The police who arrived on the scene were also baffled. There were no fingerprints at the scene other than Mr. Evans's. And since he had locked all the doors and windows before he died, it was impossible for anyone to have gotten in. The police investigated all day, but in the end, they were forced to accept that conclusion. The coroner's van arrived quickly. That night at 9 p.m., I leaned against the window and watched as Mr. Evans's body, wrapped in a white sheet, was carried into the hearse. I didn't feel the satisfaction of revenge or the relief of escape. My heart was still shrouded in a heavy gloom. But regardless, it was finally over. I couldn't stand this damn place for another second. I quickly packed my things, booked a room at a motel on my phone, and planned to leave that night. But as I walked to the main gate, I saw that the light in the security booth was still on. Old Lucas was sitting in the chair, his legs crossed, looking completely relaxed. I was curious. I walked over and asked, "Aren't you on the day shift? Why are you still here?" Lucas gave a dry laugh. "Well, you didn't come to relieve me, did you?" I smiled and told him he didn't have to guard this broken gate anymore. I fully expected Lucas to be shocked and ask me why, but he wasn't. The old man just sat there in his chair and said nonchalantly, "I know." It was as if he already knew everything. I was completely baffled. "How do you know?" Lucas just shook his head and laughed, a little manically. "Don't you worry about it. It's all over now. You've been wanting to leave this dump for a while, haven't you? Now you're free. You should get going." I said, "Oh," and instinctively picked up my suitcase and started to walk away. But as I walked, I realized something was wrong. My steps slowed until I came to a complete stop at the gate. A more critical question suddenly flooded my mind. Who put that photo on my nightstand yesterday? And who took the picture of Mr. Evans and the blind woman together? My gut told me I had missed something. So I turned back and stared at Lucas, who was sitting in his chair, humming a little tune. I said abruptly, "You took that picture, didn't you?" Who else could it have been? Lucas was clearly getting cocky. He answered without thinking, but then he realized his mistake and snapped his mouth shut, his smile a little stiff. My face instantly darkened. I should have known. The people who held the blind woman captive, there was definitely more than one. Besides the one who was initially arrested to take the fall, there were probably the tenants in 203 and 301, Mr. Evans, and the smug old man sitting in front of me. They were a group. Sensing the change in my expression, Lucas stood up, flustered. "You're leaving. Why are you asking all these questions?" "Of course I'm going to get to the bottom of this," I said. "You were involved in what happened to the blind woman, too. That's why you know so much about the ghost child, right? What kind of nonsense are you spouting?" Lucas backed away, a cold sweat on his brow. "It had nothing to do with me. I don't know anything." "You don't know?" I glared at him. "You're the one who put that photo on my nightstand, so I would tell the ghost child that Mr. Evans was the real killer. That way, she would kill him and leave satisfied, and you would be safe and sound, never having to worry about the ghost child's revenge again, right? You didn't just lie to me. You tricked me into helping you lie to a ghost. You're the one who's been hiding in the shadows this whole time." I screamed the words with every ounce of strength I had. It was so damn ironic. Mr. Evans used me as a scapegoat, but he never would have guessed that the real scapegoat was him. Probably because I had hit a nerve, Lucas dropped his friendly old man act. So what if I did? I've been living in fear for all these years. Isn't that punishment enough? Mr. Evans was the ringleader. He deserved to die. And what about you? I lunged forward and grabbed Lucas by the collar. Don't forget, you were a part of it too. I was an accomplice at most. Even if I was involved, it wasn't a death sentence. Lucas pushed me away and screamed frantically. It wasn't my idea to kidnap that blind woman. I just stumbled upon their secret, and Evans forced me to join in to keep me from going to the police. I was forced into it. Later, when things went south, Evans even tried to make me take the fall. He only picked someone else because he thought I was too old to look like the ringleader. He said that at first, they all thought that if they found someone to take the blame and get the police off their backs, everything would be fine. But then, not long after, the scapegoat died mysteriously. Then the ghost child showed up. Mr. Evans had no choice but to use the fake job postings to lure people in as new scapegoats. But that plan couldn't be used forever. So when Mr. Evans eagerly brought me in to be the next victim, Lucas had already started plotting his own escape. I was furious. I slapped Lucas across the face. And your plan was to pin everything on Evans, let the ghost child kill him, and then she'd just leave satisfied, right? What did I do wrong? Lucas was enraged too. He shoved me hard. Doesn't Evans deserve to die? You little punk, by doing this, I saved you too. Bullshit. You only did it to save yourself. I gritted my teeth, ready to attack again, but then a little girl's cold giggle came from behind me. No wonder. Mommy said there were 5 people who hurt her. We were still missing one. You didn't leave? The sudden voice sent a jolt through me. I whipped my head around to see the little girl who had appeared out of nowhere. My face went as white as a sheet. Why are you back? You were supposed to be gone. If I was shocked, Lucas was terrified out of his mind. The moment the little girl appeared, he let out a frantic scream and ran deeper into the complex. I didn't try to stop him. I just stood there, dumbfounded, staring at the little girl. Why didn't you leave? Mommy said we were still missing one, so I stayed. The little girl's eyes darted around, then she smiled at me. And I also wanted to thank you. If it wasn't for you, how would I have found all of them? I was completely stunned, a cold sweat breaking out all over me. The little girl smiled again. Don't be afraid. I'm not a ghost. What? My eyes widened. You're not a ghost? Then how did you kill all those people? I didn't kill them. Mommy took care of them herself. The little girl shook her head. Mommy had it really hard. She couldn't see when she was alive, so after she died, she didn't know what the men who hurt her looked like. Every time, I had to be her eyes. I was speechless. I'm her daughter, but I'm not a ghost. Mommy had me before the bad men kidnapped her. She had me pretend to be a ghost child so we could find out who all the bad men were. So that's how it was? After hearing her story, I was too stunned to react. In the silence, I managed a foolish laugh. You're just a kid. How could you do all this for your mom? The little girl just blinked, her face full of a heartbreaking sadness. I'm actually 14. I have a condition, so I'll never grow any bigger. Mommy was trying to get money for my treatment when she fell into their trap. I didn't know what to say. I just laughed foolishly again and was about to ask where her mother was now. But before the words left my mouth, a blood-curdling scream echoed from deep within the apartment building. It was Lucas. Get away from me. Don't come near me. Then there was a loud thud. When I turned, I saw a shriveled figure plummet from the roof of the building and smash onto the concrete below. Blood splattered everywhere. It was Lucas. Staring at the mangled body, I was in a daze. The little girl looked relieved, but her face was etched with a deep sorrow. That was the last one. Mommy will be leaving soon. As she spoke, she covered her face and sank to the ground, lost. I had no words. I looked at the girl beside me, then at Lucas's shattered body on the pavement. All my emotions dissolved into a long, helpless sigh. The moonlight was cold and mournful, casting a pale glow on our faces. The smell of blood in the air stained the quiet night a ghastly, vibrant red. A cold wind blew across my face. I felt numb, too exhausted to care about anything anymore. I turned to walk away, but I felt a small, ice-cold hand grab my ankle. "What are you doing?" I asked, frozen in place. The little girl giggled. "Mommy says she doesn't want to leave me all alone. She asked if I wanted to find a good person to be my new daddy."